Thank you. Welcome to our session on what's new in MIP. We're jumping into information protection, which is part of Purview data security. Microsoft Purview Information Protection helps you discover, classify, and protect sensitive information wherever it lives or travels. It provides organizations with robust tools to protect sensitive data effectively. Today, we're focusing on the following new features. We'll have a look at dynamic watermarking. We are looking at the MIP client, at the modernized user-defined permission dialog, on-demand classification for SharePoint and OneDrive, which is in preview, and an enhanced audit logs for auto-labeling. For a long time, customers have been asking us for this feature. We are happy it becomes available for our E5 customers. Consider a scenario where a user opens a sensitive protected document. Now, even though that user is allowed to view the document, he's not supposed to share it. Now, even though the person cannot share it freely, just opening it on the screen, taking a photo with his smartphone would already allow to post it virtually anywhere. And the problem is we don't even know who actually opened the document. We did have, or we do still have, watermarking. We have existing watermarking for containing variables, which has the username that protected the document, but that's always the same person, so that doesn't say a lot. Now, the dynamic watermarking helps strengthen the document security by embedding identifiable information into documents. So when the document opens, the username is shown, and this discourages users from leaking sensitive information and allows tracking leaks back to specific users that offended and broke the or caused the leak of this kind of information. We're sure this helps to curb users from casually oversharing those documents. Now, what happens if a user opens a document on a client that is not yet compatible with the dynamic watermarkings? Essentially, the document cannot open there. So we ensure dynamic watermarking is enforced. But remember, it needs to be configured on the label. It's available for E5 customers. It needs to be specifically configured on the label, so you maintain the same functionality for any label not implementing this functionality. Let's jump into the modernized experience for user-defined permissions. The old dialog for assigning UDP permissions in Office has a long history. It has not changed much since AD RMS times. Now, we modernized the experience, and the update is already available in M365 Apps for Enterprise, Current Channel, and in the Monthly Enterprise Channel. Be aware, as of today, you will still see the old experience in the semi-annual channel. Now, what does it allow you to do? If you try and protect or relabel a document using a label with user-defined permissions, you can now assign different permissions for individual users and groups. So you might want to say that user has only read or viewer access, and another user has editor access. As always, there is owners to the document, and you might add other groups or users to the list of owners. There is a picker available that allows you to choose users and group from your organization, or you can also add external domains to that. We believe this new experience makes it possible for users to efficiently use the user-defined permissions without falling back to this very old-fashioned dialect that has been around for probably around 15 years by now. I encourage you to have a look at the new experience with the current channel or the monthly enterprise channel. Let's have a look at the Microsoft Purview Information Protection Client. Word, Excel, and PowerPoint already allow you to classify documents inside the applications. Now, the Microsoft Purview Information Protection Client adds the following capabilities. It allows you to right-click on a file, it could be on your device or on a file share, to apply a certain label. You can also use PowerShell command that's for scripting, classification of documents, whole directories, etc. The viewer component allows opening protected files such as PDFs. And in general, this MPIP client replaces these functions that were also part of the deprecated AIP client. Now be aware, the AIP client also contained add-ins for Office applications such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, which are not available in the Microsoft Purview Information Protection Client. The OCR for Exchange Online has been improved. In general, OCR technology allows for effective scanning of standalone images in Exchange Online to identify sensitive information. Now, the new support for embedded images in Exchange Online enables detection of sensitive information also within email attachments and documents. Now, this allows getting greater visibility of sensitive information hidden with embedded images, ensuring a data protection. Some customers have stored files in SharePoint and OneDrive before they even enabled SharePoint integration with sensitivity labeling. Or they may have created custom sensitive information types after they stored that data. In both cases, SharePoint and OneDrive cannot understand what are the contents of those files. They would not be able to see newly created SITs that all data would contain them. Now, here the new feature comes to the rescue. On-demand classification expands the scope of the data protection by scanning those files I mentioned that have not yet been classified or modified for a long time. Now, once they are classified, customers can automatically apply the relevant sensitivity labels based on their organization's labeling policies. This ensures that files, regardless of when they were last modified or accessed, are protected and compliant with organizational policies. And this is a pay-as-you-go feature, so there will be additional costs incurred when using this feature. And one other comment, if you do modify a file, or you have maybe a couple of files that are modified frequently, is less relevant for you, for at least for those files, because those files will then be re-indexed and they will be re-evaluated with the new SITs, etc. This is especially for stale files or for files that have never been ingested, as we say in SharePoint, to identify what kind of data they contain. And lastly, we would like to explain enhanced audit logs for the auto-labeling. In the last section, we mentioned auto-labeling, and what sometimes happens is you do not have full visibility, or you did not have full visibility, and that has now been largely addressed because we have enhanced the audit logs with detailed insights into why a file was labeled, therefore improving the transparency. It will now report specific policies and the rules that trigger the auto-labeling of files. Now, with those better insights, administrators can refine their labeling policies for more consistent data management. Thank you so far for your interest. Do we have any questions from the audience that we want to discuss now?
Yes, we do, and I will go ahead and read some out. Okay. So the first question is, for dynamic watermarking for other E5 only features, is the E5 check done for the user who applies the label only, or does it also apply for the user who opens the document too? Example, would E3 users or unlicensed guest users be able to open a dynamic watermarking label protected document?
That's a very good question. I have not tested that particular scenario yet in a lab, so we would have to double check. Now, coming from the double key encryption as a feature, it's usually the act of protecting that triggers the licensing requirements. So my assumption would be it is actually the act of protecting that would make visible those labels, but it's definitely worth checking, and we may have to revisit that just to ensure we got that correct.
Great. And then the next question is the MPIP client features for right-click protect available today?
Absolutely. It has been released, I believe, around 2 months ago already. And we wanted that just to re-emphasize that the feature is available, it can be freely downloaded. Another comment is it is still being updated more or less on a monthly basis. So the feature is still being improved. Right now we have a cadence of roughly a monthly update, and I'm quite sure this will become a cadence of one update per quarter. So every 3 months we should have an update on the feature. But yes, it's available for download and install, and it requires E3 licenses only.
Perfect. The next question is, on-demand classification for SharePoint and OneDrive will replace the feature of Defender for apps that can do the same?
This is difficult to say bluntly, just like it does replace or it does not replace. It certainly triggers certain aspects, but I think that the best angle or the best aspect of this new feature is it lets SharePoint identify what there is in a client, and it is pay-as-you-go based, so you are not being unnecessarily throttled, assuming revisiting certain files is very important to you, and you're ready to pay for this processing. I'm not 100% sure it's a full replacement of the MDA component, but it's certainly worth having a look at.
Great. And the next question is, how can a user assign label themselves to files without having to open them individually, not on demand scan?
So the documents are based if the documents are in a file share, the MPIP client might actually help. You can take a whole directory, a whole folder, and assign the same label for all, let's say, Word documents in that folder, or you can multi-select certain files. If you're skilled, you can also use PowerShell to script the whole operation. And I think that's also mentioned on the slide about the MPIP client. Now, are you saying those documents are in SharePoint and OneDrive? Or what is the scenario exactly in this question?
I think so.
So the question would be to apply labels on multiple documents without, maybe someone from my team can help out here. I would not be immediately aware of an option to do that on multiple files as a user without opening those documents individually. Maybe someone can jump in and help if they just know the answer on top of their heads.
It looks like maybe some are answering in the chat as well. So we can move on to the next question. Does the audit log improvement also apply to client-side auto labeling?
The client-side auto labeling and the service-based auto labeling in SharePoint and OneDrive, for instance, are two different features altogether. So we already do have some. We already have the Activity Explorer had that since the Office built-in sensitivity labeling became available. You could already see a lot in the Activity Explorer on as to why something was labeled. The feature improvement is relevant for the service-based automatic labeling only, and it does not influence the auditing or the logging for the client-based auto labeling. If that answers the question.
Yeah, great. And then the next question, if the E5 license check is done only for the person applying/performing the act of protection, how does this then work for auto apply labels? Which user is license checked in that case and needs to be E5 licensed?
I'm not a specialist and an authoritative person on licensing questions. My understanding, however, has always been that you need to have an E5 license for all users for whom the documents are being protected for. So if you have, for instance, a SharePoint site, which is accessed by, let's say, a whole division, then the whole division would need E5, as far as I understand. But when you have any doubts, you have to reach out to your account team to get an authoritative answer on the licensing questions. So take that with a grain of salt.
Perfect. And then next, can you elaborate on the PowerShell scripts? I believe these were already available.
So the PowerShell scripts or the PowerShell functionality was already available in the AIP client. And in fact, we do have alias for the old commands, which were like set-AIP file label, and are now, for instance, called set-file label only. But if you still have the old commands, your scripts might still work because the old labels are still registered as alias for the new commandlets. Some of the when this is about unprotecting documents or removing the label, I'm afraid you will have to choose the new names. But in general, you can rewrite or you can just update your scripts and, of course, retest your scripts. And by and large, your old script would then still work and be able to automatically assign a label or to have a batch labeling of your on-prem resources, of your files, etc. And I did not mention this with the MPIP client. The the scanner is also part of the MIP client. And so if you have been using the AIP scanner, it is now just called the MIP scanner, and it's part of the MIP client, and you could still use it going forward for your on-prem resources. Does it answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. And then the next question, is it possible to label zip files?
If you take a zip file and right-click on it and set the label, you end up with a .xy test.zip.p file. So it will be in a protected container. Now, there is a condition. You need to choose a label that has protection assigned. You cannot do that with a label that is only classification only and not actually protecting the document or encrypting if you want the document. In that sense, it is possible. That does not change the label or the protection of any PDFs or Office documents inside that zip file. It's just for the overall zip as a container that will become a P file, and you can then remove the protection from the using again the MIP client. You can right-click on it and remove that kind of protection. In that sense, it is possible to label as zip files. Okay.
Great, thank you. The next question, is it mandatory to install the MPIP agent on the endpoint to classify multiple files, for instance, on the right click?
The functionality outside of Office requires the MIP client. In the same way as you previously had to install the AIP client as well, even if your Office versions already had Office built-in sensitivity labeling. So in that sense, it is required. If you only want to open documents or create new documents and assign a label, you can happily do that just inside Office using Office built-in sensitivity labeling.
Perfect. And then the next question, once auto labeling of emails is set by default to a specific sensitivity label, is it possible to make this user specific as opposed to org specific?
So if you have auto labeling in service-based auto labeling rules, is that the scenario here behind?
I think so. If auto labeling of emails is set by default to a specific sensitivity label, is it possible to change it from org specific to change it to user specific?
So let's cut the question into two scenarios. If you have client-based auto labeling and you have specific labels, that particular label, the rules that would trigger that label apply to all users to whom this label is published. So if a user sees the label Contoso internal and it is being triggered by saying 5 or more credit card numbers, then all users that have this label will actually get the label applied. And that has to be done on a per label basis. Now, if some users in Contoso would have one set of labels and others would have a different set of labels, you could distinguish by that, but that's not very practical, to be honest. But you can distinguish by having available labels. That might maybe be an idea if you have different departments of Contoso that would not have all the labels, but it is really tied to those labels. Things would then be different when you have service-based auto labeling. There you can have rules like if a mail is sent by a certain address, then you can apply some label, and then you have another rule that does something different. I'm not quite sure the question pertains to the user-based auto labeling, where already provided that answer, or whether it is more specialized it's more specific to the service-based auto-labeling, where you might have a bit more leeway in defining different labels to be applied depending on which of the rules trigger on the service-based auto-labeling. If it's client-based auto-labeling, it is defined to be precise on the label that is actually triggering the whole labeling, on the label and whether that label is published. I hope that answers the question.
That's great. The next question is, how about other file types like TXT and other OEM file types? Does MPIP also support classification of these files?
So the TXT and JPEGs formats, for instance, can also be labeled with the MPIP client. They will end in a protected text file, which has the extension .ptxt. And similar to what I mentioned with the zip file, you can only apply a label that also includes some kind of protection. File types such as PDF or the Office formats can also you can also label labels without any protection to them. But if you're talking about text files or JPEG files, etc., then you need to take a label that contains protection.
Perfect. And then this next question says, is autosave in Office required to be enabled for labeling to work?
Autosave in Office. In general, I mean, I can take Office built-in sensitivity labeling. I can just open it and have a locally stored text file, or let's say Word document, create a new Word document, and then assign a certain label. And there's no such thing like auto-labeling, autosave even included, because I'm saving that locally to my device or to a file share for that matter. So in that context, certainly you do not need to have autosave. I'm even quite sure that does not apply to SharePoint. So if you disable autosave, then you should still be, in my opinion, you should still be able to apply a label. But at the very least, you can do that for locally stored files. There's not even an autosave option for that available at all.
Great. The next question says, can protected files be scanned by DLP?
Absolutely. And files protected with AIP service-based labels, which have the key in the cloud, can be scanned by Exchange Online DLP and would also be integrated by SharePoint, and hence also they would also be governed. SharePoint DLP would also be able to control sharing of those files. In that sense, it works. As of today, it does not, to my knowledge, not work for endpoint DLP. Cannot look into protected documents, but maybe someone else on the call has a more precise answer on the endpoint DLP scenario.
Perfect. If they do, please go ahead and respond to them in the chat. The next question says, is it possible to label zip files without MPIP client?
Hypothetically speaking, you could just create your own, using the MIP SDK, create your own tools. But out of the box, the only way I'm aware of labeling and protecting zip files is actually the MPIP client. And of course, formerly it had been the AIP client, which is now deprecated, as I already mentioned.
Great. Okay, a few more for you. Is it possible to prevent download of unlabeled files from non-hybrid Entra devices while allowing some MIP label files? Defender for Cloud Apps doesn't seem to have a session policy control that includes unlabeled files. unless you block all downloads?
I would have to skip that particular question. That seems more like a DLP scenario. And at least I'm not aware on the MIP side how to address this.
Okay. Sounds good. Moving on to the next question. Can we disable the feature of access control in MPIP agent on some users or groups?
Access control is to have them completely ignore any of the rights assigned to protected documents, I presume. So what you could do for, mostly that's not normal users, but admins, if you provide them with super user access or the super user role, they can access just any file and they can always remove the protection or do whatever they want and print those documents out, etc. Because they have super user rights. So the usual permissions do not apply. The document is still protected, but if those users open it, or those admins, I should say, then they can do whatever they want with those files, even if they have not been explicitly given permission, or even if they have been given only, let's say, a viewer permission, they can still remove the whole protection if need be. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's great. The next question says, is it possible to pass folder permissions on a SharePoint site to be passed to UDP label in that folder?
So the folder permissions, so in general, the applying a UDP label in SharePoint is not supported as of today. So that would also apply to this kind of scenario, to my knowledge. There is no dialog that would allow you or trigger the end user to select some permissions for that UDP label.
Okay, perfect.
The way I understand it is not possible. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question says, how about email support in MPIP? Is MIME supported?
So the support that, to an extent, the MPIP client can be used to remove the protection from any emails stored in a PSD, and that includes not only the emails in MIME, which are in MIME format, but it includes even attachments to those emails as long as they're protected on the local tenant. So it can still be used to take a PSD file and remove the whole protection altogether, assuming you have the right permissions, which might be actually a good use of the super user rights. In that sense, it is supported. If the question is, can I use it to apply a protection for emails in some format, then the answer is no. You cannot use the MPIP client to, let's say, right-click and assign mail protection to individual emails or even PSD containing emails, etc. So it's only for removing protection. Okay.
Great, perfect. And then it looks like we just have 3 more questions. Am I correct in thinking the MPIP client/PowerShell integrates with auto classifying on premium network file shares?
So it integrates with auto classification using, so the MPIP client is, or the scanner, or there is even a PowerShell commandlet that would inspect the files and search for the old pattern-based SITs. And if configured this way, if configured on the respective labels, would apply, let's say, a specific label on a Word document if there are more than 5 credit cards. So that kind of scenario would work. I'm not quite sure about the file type you mentioned. The file in general, that the scanner or even the PowerShell commandlet would work for file shares and local files alike. I'm not quite sure about the repository. Can you repeat that one?
Yes, it was for premium network file shares.
For premium network file shares, that does not ring a bell for me. Maybe someone else on the call might jump in, but I have not heard about that one.
Okay, no worries. Okay, the last two questions. The first says, is there a limit to how many different classification labels an organization should or can have?
There is hard limits and practical limits. The first hard limit is 500 labels overall in the whole organizations that do have predefined permissions. We also call them template-based labels. And on request, they can be increased to, I'm not sure, maybe 1,000. So that needs a support request, and then the limit might be increased. By default, we're talking about 500 labels in that sense. Overall, there is one practical limit. You must not have more than a reasonable amount of labels, maybe 1 to maybe 3 dozen for an individual user. So, and that it contains both labels with protection, without protection, predefined or not, or UDP protection. So there you should really restrain yourself, or your end users will not accept the whole solution. Now, different sets of users may have different labels, and even there, you should not go, if at all possible, you should not increase above maybe 100 labels. And you have to be aware that when you have a few hundred labels, and we have seen that with customers, the performance of MIP SDK or the whole labeling might suffer to some extent. So you have to be a bit careful about performance effect. If we have hundreds of labels, let's assume with classification only labels, which is technically possible, still supported, but for practical reasons, you will have performance impact on that one. Then there is the hard limit on labels with predefined permissions. I called out for 500. And then you have more leeway with labels that have UDP labels that there's no predefined permission associated with, or with labels that do not have any protection at all. So short answer, 500 predefined permissions. Practical limit, you should not have much more labels overall in the whole organization, and you should only have a reasonable amount of labels assigned to individual user groups. Does that answer the question? That's
great, thank you. And going back to the last question, it looks like the attendee said it's on-premises network file shares.
On-premises.
Not premium.
Okay. Yeah, that's the file shares, and there the answer applies. You could run a specific commandlet contained in the MIP client, and have the operator run it against a file share, or maybe you can either script it or just doing it for the whole directory, and then check each file whether it contains the old-fashioned SIT. So this does not apply to any of the modern classifications, does not apply to EDM and stuff like that. But if you have, let's say, you check for credit cards or IBAN numbers and things like that, then it would identify the rules per the label and would apply that label. And you can run that with individual commands, or you can script it, or you could also install the MIP scanner if you have a bit more effort, and maybe you have a large file shares, and you could run it like that and could then apply the labels in an automatic manner with those limitations in mind. Okay.
Perfect. That's great. The next question says, are sensitive labels compatible with 3D drawings such as JT or STP files?
JD or STP, those are file extensions?
JT or STP files?
It is just a twofold answer here. with the MPIP client, you can basically protect anything you like. So it's pretty much up to you. And then you will end up with a stp.p file lying around somewhere. That's the first answer. Now the better answer is usually that the software for those files is enlightened to use labeling, and there is a MIP SDK available. So if they implement that MIP SDK, they can offer labeling in their applications, and that would make good use of the functionality. And you could also then have different rights. So maybe one user is able to view it, another view and print it, another can edit, etc., etc. So that's the idea of information protection. But again, if the vendor of the software is not willing to invest in that, or maybe the vendor no longer exists, etc., then you could still just apply a label with protection, contains protection, using the right click with the MPIP client, and then you end up with a xyz.p file document, and which is then obviously protected with a certain with that label you chose. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question says, on Purview DLP, is it possible to group restrictions for accessing specific files and resource when setting up the policy, or will it apply to everyone by default?
So if this is about Purview DLP accessing protected documents, or did I misunderstand? Maybe you can repeat the question.
Sure. On Purview DLP, is it possible to group restrictions for accessing specific files and resources when setting up the policy, or will it apply to everyone by default?
So as far as I understand, the Purview DLP policies, you can scope them to individual groups. You can also have exclusions for users and groups where the whole policy would apply. I'm not aware on how you combine that with accessing any of the protected documents using the Purview DLP. Maybe someone more familiar with the DLP side might help out here.
Perfect. And if they can put it in the chat, that would be perfect. Okay, and then let's see. We'll go with one last question here. Can an organization maintain strict highest level GRC policy at the intra and RBAC controls level for the entire enterprise through senior admins and not grant super user operations level control to any entity? In this case, it would be a Purview permissions group for both humans and AI agents.
So the super user rights is a AIP service configuration that can be applied to either a group, and membership to that group can then, of course, be managed with Entra ID somehow, but it can even be assigned to individual users. To my knowledge, if an admin has the AIP service admin rights, he's free to assign the super user permission to any individual of that tenant, and he cannot be hindered from doing so. Now, maybe there is some magic on the Entra side I missed, but to my knowledge, it is governed by the AIP Service Administration, and I'm afraid that cannot be achieved. For what's the objective of the question there? Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, and on Purview DLP, is it possible to group restrictions for accessing specific files and resources? Oh, we already covered that one. Okay, perfect. I think that answers most of the questions here. So, thank you, Martin, for being our guest and for sharing the great information with our community. Also, thank you to the Q&A team who helped us with answering the questions and providing the resourceful information. To all the listeners still on the line, if you're someone who wishes to aid in the protection of the world from cyber threats and desire to have a say in shaping our strategies, blueprints, and recommendations, then we invite you to become part of our security community. Together, we can make a global impact. So join us at aka.ms/securitycommunity. This is also where you'll be notified about the upcoming webinars, events, and other announcements. Also, please take a minute submitting your webinar feedback at aka.ms/security-webinar-feedback. For those of you who may have additional questions on the topic we just covered or other product-related questions, please feel free to raise them on our Microsoft Tech Community discussion space at aka.ms/Azure Purview Community. Thank you all for being part of our community and for joining us on these webinars. We hope to see you next time. Goodbye.